Welcome, and thank you for joining the conversation on the crossroads of STEM and workplace culture. I'm Ann Camden, and I lead the employee engagement practice at G&S Business Communications. I first became interested in STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math, as a business culture dynamic when I watched our clients struggle with innovation and collaboration among their R&D, technology, and innovation groups. It was a real challenge for them to build a comprehensive culture. We see companies struggle to engage their knowledge-based workforce that can often be characterized as competitive, slightly introverted, and sometimes even reclusive. Organizations struggle to celebrate these unique pockets of individuals while aligning these teams with the overall corporate culture, especially when it comes to collaboration and innovation. We found that when companies strategically focus on building a comprehensive corporate culture, they enjoy a very successful and fulfilling business model. And that is why we are here today. Let me just run through a little bit of an overview of how the next hour will work. First, we'll hear from Lindsey Kotrba, the president of Denison Consulting. Armed with a PhD in organizational psychology, she is actively researching organizational culture and leadership effectiveness. Denison has partnered with thousands of global organizations to define their cultures and effectiveness, and we're looking forward to Lindsey sharing her insights on those macro trends. One of those organizations could be Lockheed Martin. Synonymous with highly intellectual, skilled employees, Dr. Vernon Ross is going to give us a glimpse of their strategy. As the Director of STEM Generations and Higher Education, he is currently responsible for the design and implementation of their strategy to align STEM programs internally and externally. He's developed some outstanding programs and will share his insights with us. And finally, we'll hear from Neddy Perez. She's the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at Ingersoll Rand. With 24 years of experience developing programs at a variety of Fortune 500 companies, she's passionate about STEM. In 2010, she helped co-found STEM Connector, a clearinghouse for all things STEM. And if you haven't checked out this website, you definitely should. Neddy will provide some best case practices that she's put to work at some of the world's leading brands. Each panelist will share a few remarks, and then I'll open it up for Q&A. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, just type it into the chat box on the right side of your screen, and I'll direct it to the appropriate resource. Before I turn the presentation over to Lindsey, I want to frame up the conversation from our perspective. I've had this theory that culture is different in STEM organizations for several years. And along the way, I've vetted my theory at various industry meetings, broaching both human resources and internal communications. I've blogged about it on our website, and I've spoken about it several times. And despite the overwhelming interest in our topic amongst this audience, I wanted to still get yet a broader view. So I worked with our Insights and Analytics department to conduct a quick mainstream pulse check. We asked about personal priorities in the workplace and their impact on corporate culture. The results have intrigued me and will likely reflect some of the comments that our panelists will share today. We started by asking 1,000 employed adults to self-select if they were working at a STEM or non-STEM organization, and we did help define it for them. In this first graph, we asked them what their personal priority was at work and asked them to rank their top 3 attributes. You can see here on the top line that overwhelmingly operating with ethics and integrity comes in first. It doesn't matter what type of organization it is. We want to do our job with integrity. Despite what we read in the media about various business gaffes, employees are people of character and we want to do the right thing. And I don't know about you, but that made me feel pretty good. The second attribute is an atmosphere of creativity or innovation, and that saw a slight difference in STEM versus non-STEM. The blue bar represents non-STEM and is slightly lower as a personal priority for the non-STEM workforce. It's probably not statistically a huge variance, but it is worthy of a quick observation. And the third highest rated personal priority is continual training for advancement. As self-described STEM respondents, this metric skews slightly higher for STEM respondents. They are likely more aggressively seeking ongoing training, possibly for certifications and/or compliance, in order to stay at the top of their game. We saw the fewest number of respondents selecting diversity and inclusion among their top 3 attributes, and there seems to be a relative disinterest in diversity and inclusion among both groups. We'll touch on this with both Neddy and Vernon during our conversations and better understand why it might not be a personal priority. On the flip side, we asked the same respondents to evaluate how their company prioritizes these same attributes, again asking for the top 3 corporate priorities. Again, ethics and integrity rose to the top and in very similar proportions. Even with highly visible scandals and investigations going on at top, long-standing global brands, people still believe that companies are adhering to high ethical standards. And from here, we saw that respondents had differing views on corporate priorities. While those selecting themselves as STEM organizations prioritize the collaborative environment as a key priority for their company, employees at non-STEM organizations saw an overwhelming emphasis on safety, and these probably deserve a little closer inspection. The corporate emphasis for ongoing training was still recognized as an important attribute, although down slightly from a personal perspective. It makes me wonder if more employees are taking on this responsibility themselves and independently seeking out training beyond their organization. Not surprising, diversity and inclusion was seen as a much bigger corporate priority than a personal priority. STEM employees cited it least often among the 6 attributes to describe their company culture, which tells me that companies have to do a much better job communicating the business value and individual rewards of a diverse workplace. Despite the recent ethical breaches, and overwhelmingly the most critical attribute was identified as ethics and integrity. It begs the question, what are the best practices in defining and nurturing culture within science and tech-based companies? And where do we get started? And with that, I'll ask Lindsey for her perspective and insight on how workplace culture will impact business performance. Lindsey?
Thanks, Anne, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this webinar today. I'm really excited to be here and to be part of this great lineup of speakers in this really important topic. My plan today is to talk about the importance of organizational culture, and particularly about the culture elements of successful STEM organizations. So what is unique about these STEM cultures, and what do effective STEM organizations do really well? So with that, to get us started, I wanted to share the lens that we use here at Denison to think about organizational culture. So certainly there are lots of things that make up an organization's culture, from the clothes that people wear to where people park and what time they show up to scheduled meetings. But what we really focus on at Denison are those aspects of culture that have been linked to business performance. And those aspects more specifically are mission, so that's in the red area in the image that you're looking at. And mission really has to do with whether there's clarity and alignment around the organization's purpose and direction. So more specifically, is there a long-term vision? Are there strategic priorities and shorter-term goals and objectives that create a line of sight for employees, from what the organization is trying to accomplish down to what am I trying to accomplish? We also look at consistency, which is in the yellow, and consistency is really all about defining the values and the systems that are the basis of a strong culture. So it's about creating efficiency and consistency in organizations. How do our values actually guide our behaviors as opposed to being their practice values, not stated values? How do they guide our behaviors, and how do they guide our decisions and create efficiencies in the organization? How do we make decisions and work together and be able to move forward in aligned and consistent ways? The next kind of area, the green area, is involvement, which is all about building a sense of commitment, ownership, and responsibility in the organization. So are we building capability in our people that is in line with what we're trying to do? Do we encourage informed decision-making and empowerment of our people? And do we empower teams as a way to get work done? And finally, the blue area, adaptability, is about translating the demands of the business environment into action. So in other words, are we listening to the market and to our customers, and are we taking that information to drive informed change in the organization? Do we have a mindset of continuous learning and improvement that's rooted in seeking to understand what's happening in the marketplace and with our customers? In the boxes around the model, you can see how these aspects of culture relate to different aspects of business performance. So for example, adaptability and mission tend to be the strongest predictors of things like growth and innovation, while involvement and consistency predict employee satisfaction and quality and metrics of that nature. So this graph really gives you a bird's eye view of where some of the strongest relationships lie. And with that broad overview of our view on culture, particularly relevant to this webinar, we want to talk about the cultures of effective STEM organizations and about the characteristics that they tend to have in common. In particular, we find that STEM organizations tend to have a lot of pressure to be adaptive and innovative, and talked a little bit about that already, but also they must do that with a really high degree of quality. So often the work that they're doing can have really big consequences and a major impact on the outside world. And because of that, while they're needing to constantly innovate and create new things, they're needing to do that under extreme pressure to have those new things be flawless. So the tension between adaptability and consistency, which are the blue and yellow pieces of the model, is often really, really strong in STEM organizations and STEM environments. So if we take a pretty current example and look at the Volkswagen situation, this tension and these aspects of culture really do kind of come to life. So in that situation, what was the pressure to innovate? That was pretty high. And what were their core values? How did those connect both to that mission and that pressure to innovate, but also how were people empowered to use those values as a guide in their behavior and their decisions? And how are people empowered to speak up or challenge or manage risk in that scenario? So these are some of the things that we think about when we think about culture and we think about STEM organizations, and we think about how STEM organizations can effectively manage their culture to do these things successfully. So let's take a look at some of what we've seen as relatively consistent characteristics of effective STEM cultures. So first, effective STEMs tend to have a strong shared vision, and people are clear how they fit into that vision. This vision is consistent and doesn't waver or shift, though the organization will likely need a lot of flexibility and innovation to meet that vision. That vision stays pretty constant in and of itself. Second, they also manage details. They're super vigilant. It's a requirement. And to truly be vigilant and not allow details to fall through the cracks, they share information so that they understand all the pieces of the puzzle with great detail. Sometimes this information sharing and cross-team coordination can actually be pretty difficult for STEMs. So different parts of STEM organizations in some instances may actually be competing with each other at times for things like funding and other things. So managing this coordination is an absolute requirement for effective STEM organizations, but it can also be something that's particularly challenging to do. Third, they also tend to have safety and quality as practice core values. So in other words, safety and quality are kind of part of their core, part of their DNA, part of who they are. It's important in this instance to distinguish between practiced and stated values, and that effective STEMs are willing to make the hard decisions, actually live these values from the leadership down to the front line, and hold people accountable. Fourth, they also tend to allow those people who are close to the work to make the decisions. And fifth, they more than encourage innovation, they expect it. It's part of their mission, part of their people's rules, truly part of the DNA of the organization. Finally, they're really successful at managing that tension that we've already talked about between being adaptable, changing, and innovating, but doing so in a way that ensures quality, efficiency, safety. They're consistent in the implementation of their flexibility, and they understand that flexibility and consistency aren't actually at odds with each other, but are two critical factors of success. So simply, it's not an either or, and they temper their action by reflection and learning to ensure that they're doing the right thing. So it's flexibility and change, but doing so in an informed and consistent way. Beyond the characteristics of effective STEMs, we've also looked at the outcomes that are frequently important to these kinds of organizations. So to the next slide, outcomes such as innovation, safety, and risk management tend to be pretty important to STEM organizations, and we've identified the aspects of organizational culture that tend to be the strongest predictors of these really important outcomes. So in other words, if I'm trying to move the needle in innovation, what pieces of the puzzle give me the most leverage? So we've already talked a lot about the importance of innovation for STEMs, and we find that the strongest predictors of innovation tend to be strong vision, learning mindset, change orientation, and employees having the information and authority that they need to make decisions. But in general, it's really most highly related to that blue area, the adaptability area of the model. Safety is also often top of mind in many STEM organizations, and we've found the most important predictors of safety to be an organization's ability to make aligned decisions on critical issues that allow them to move forward in a consistent way. So really the agreement piece of the model within consistency, and also about promoting effective teamwork to meet organizational objectives. So STEM organizations also need to manage risk. We've already talked a little bit about what they do often has to be right. There's little to no room for error, and risk management is extremely important. And part of risk management includes building a speak-up culture, and this speak-up part of managing risk can be particularly difficult to navigate in STEM for various reasons. There's a lot of highly skilled workforce in STEM organizations, and often people find themselves in a position of having difficulty to kind of challenge people with a great deal of technical expertise, and so building this speak-up can be particularly challenging, but is critically important to managing risk. It's also perhaps not surprising that those organizations that are able to most effectively manage risks are those with strength in the yellow consistency area of the model. In short, both safety and risk pieces are tied pretty closely to consistency, while innovation is tied pretty closely to adaptability. So this again is highlighting, this time from a research perspective, the tension between adaptability and consistency that STEMs really need to be able to manage. And up to this point, while I've talked a lot about the cultural elements that are important to effective STEMs, we also view culture and leadership as two sides of the same coin, and have done a good amount of research that's also looking at perceptions of leaders in different environments. So I want to switch gears just for a quick minute before I transition over to the other presenters to expose you to some of our work on the leadership side of things. So one study in particular looked at how male versus female leaders view themselves and are viewed by others in male-dominated versus female-dominated industries. And while not all STEM organizations are male-dominated, there certainly are some that are. And what this research ultimately shows is that female leaders in male-dominated environments both view themselves less favorably than their male counterparts in these industries, but they also view themselves less favorably than their female counterparts in female-dominated industries. So to us, this highlights a real need to develop programs that enhance women's perceptions of self-efficacy and self-confidence in these types of environments, because interestingly, the second graph on this slide here shows that others' perceptions of women are pretty equal to their male counterparts, so it's really women's self-perceptions in these environments that are much less than their male counterparts. So I hope with that I'm providing a good transition to the other presenters who will be talking in a lot more detail, as Ann already mentioned, about the diversity and inclusion pieces here. So with that, I'll pass it back to Ann, and thanks, I appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Lindsey. I know this raised a lot of questions for me, but I'll keep going, and I'll turn it over to Vernon Ross here in just a second. If you have questions that you'd like to ask of Lindsey or any of the panelists, feel free to write them in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. It's got the little blue bubble there, and we'll get those answered in the Q&A section here in just a few minutes. But meanwhile, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Vernon Ross, who should have some amazing things to say about diversity in the workplace, especially in a STEM organization, and the role of those employee resource groups and affinity groups, and what a difference that's made at Lockheed Martin.
Thank you, Ann, and I'm actually honored to be on this webinar today. I'm honored because, as you can imagine, for Lockheed Martin, STEM and diversity and inclusion are very key elements of our culture. And given the type of business that Lockheed Martin is, a global IT, aerospace, defense organization with over 100,000 employees, STEM is most important to our organization. Lockheed Martin is very much aware that over the next 8 years, there will be more jobs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics than any other occupation. And so Lockheed takes STEM very seriously, and it is really a focus area across the entire enterprise, and we've now began to focus on STEM from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but also from a development perspective, even in our international markets. And so for the first time in the history of the company, we have folks who are really involved across the board in STEM. Since STEM is a critical focus for Lockheed Martin, I want to share today our collaborative approach that is in place today to ensure that we are addressing all levels of STEM. And it is indeed a collaborative approach. From a communication perspective, or within our communications organization, they have the responsibility for all K-12 initiatives, and they have the responsibility to address the challenges and strengthen the workforce pipeline. Lockheed Martin provides generous funding to STEM education and outreach activities for students from elementary all the way out through college. Within our corporate engineering organization, they have the responsibility to ensure that there is a connection between the Lockheed Martin industry and industry in general to the classroom. To give you an example, we are starting in 2016 virtual webinars that will be presented by Lockheed Martin senior scientists and technologists to various university college campuses so that we are making the connection between industry and the classroom, and that is our engineering responsibility. Human resources has a STEM and a culture responsibility from a talent acquisition perspective. And so we engage many colleges and universities. We provide a very in-depth level of engagement. We are branding ourselves on the various colleges and university campuses, and we are providing on-campus recruiting that will help us not only build a pipeline of future STEM talent, but a pipeline of diverse STEM talent. And so we have embedded our diversity and inclusion objectives and goals in that strategy. And then from an international perspective, we have learned that various international markets do things somewhat different and have different laws than we have in the state. However, we are endeavoring to ensure that in all of our international markets that we are addressing, providing the support and resources to address the challenges and strengthen our workforce. I indicated that Lockheed Martin has over 110 employees. 56,000 of the 110 employees are engineers, scientists, and IT professionals. And so Lockheed Martin is committed to working with these groups to develop programs and resources that will educate and inspire tomorrow's scientists, engineers, and mathematicians. If we could go to the next slide. In my role as Director of STEM Generations and Higher Education, I've had the task of putting together Lockheed Martin first enterprise-wide STEM structure, which would bring all of our STEM-related activities under one umbrella. Today, we have STEM activities within those various functions taking place within each business area and our international markets, and it's somewhat stovepiped. What I have recommended, my organization has recommended, and the plan is to launch this structure early 2016 is to put in place a STEM Executive Leadership Council, and from an advisory perspective, Diversity and Inclusion Director, our Community Relations Director, our Talent Acquisition Director, and our Corporate Engineering, Technology, and Operations Director will serve as an advisory board to the STEM Executive Leadership Council. We will have a rotating STEM chair, and that chair could come from any of the members on the advisory board. Finance is on the advisory board, or will be on the advisory board, to ensure that we are staying within budget and to help us leverage our financial resources. In the blue boxes, you see all of our business areas, and we will have a representative from each business area, including Lockheed Martin International, who will comprise our enterprise-wide STEM Council. And then we are recommending that each business area have a STEM Council at the business area level that will get their direction and overarching strategy from this enterprise-wide council. We have developed some focus areas. We certainly want our workforce to be well aware of the importance of STEM to the organization, the various STEM programs, and how they can participate in those programs. We want to ensure that there is ongoing community outreach so that those in the community are fully aware and that we are leveraging the resources that we have to support the community. I won't go through all of them, but we will endeavor to establish industry partnerships. We have a marketing and advertisement organization in place. Of course, our talent acquisition organization will have some very robust recruiting and retention strategies that they will be rolling out. So we will use social media and build a repository of all of the STEM-related activities so that our organizations might leverage the resources that are available today and will be available in the future. And then we want to ensure that that educators from K-12 and in college are fully aware of the importance of STEM and helping them to become more effective in their classroom from a STEM perspective. So we will be launching webinars designed solely for K-12 teachers and college professors to expose them to things such as cybersecurity, cloud computing, data science, big data, and those things that are most critical in the STEM arena. And so with this structure and combined with diversity and inclusion, all of our resource groups, all of the affinity groups, they will be involved in this process. And then from a diversity perspective, we also launched the first ever Lockheed Martin Historically Black Colleges and Universities strategy, aligned to ensure that we are building a very diverse pipeline of talent. And so we are reaching out to 15 historically black colleges and universities to ensure that we are supporting their efforts, supporting their programs, and helping to develop students that will become part of the Lockheed Martin pipeline. And I think I would like to end there, and I think that's my last slide, but Lockheed Martin is and has put in place a very robust structure to ensure that all of our employees understand the value of STEM to the workforce. And then from a culture perspective, that's where the generations will come in, and I will be in 2016, or the organization will be in 2016, looking at the various generations and what are their needs from a STEM perspective. And that's why my title is STEM Generations and Higher Education, because some of our more experienced employees, they are we're really concerned about having the STEM experience, exposure, and skills necessary to remain competitive and employed. And so that's why we will be addressing the generational piece in the future. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I could go on and on, given my passion for STEM and STEM from a cultural perspective, but these are the things I want to share with you today. So Ann, thank you, and thank the participants, the speakers, and I'll be around for questions afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vernon. That was excellent. We really appreciate seeing how you've really rolled STEM up into kind of one organization or one stream that's not quite so fragmented. I know a lot of times we see a lot of redundancies and inefficiencies with fragmented approaches to STEM and diversity. So it's great to see it there. And I have 1,000 questions. I know that the CEO of Lockheed Martin is female, and I have to wonder, you know, is that part of a gender thing there? Is there, you know, something about that nurturing and that type of environment that maybe helps with those efforts? And I'd love to hear more about the generational, but we'll go ahead and switch to Neddy Perez and hear her comments as well. Go ahead and kick it back over to Neddy. And meanwhile, if you have questions, I'm getting a few already in. By all means, go ahead and send those in now. And as soon as Neddy finishes her comments, we'll open it up for Q&A.
Hi, and thank you very much. Vern, I could feel the passion that you have for the work in the STEM space. And Lindsey, I thought you did a great job with regards to the Denison model. I had not personally thought about applying the Denison model to the work we're doing, but I definitely want to talk to you after this call, because it's a great way to look at the work and how to lay it out, and to ensure that the organization has got a commitment around STEM initiatives. For Ingersoll Rand, if you'd like to go to the next slide, especially next couple of slides, that would work great. We are a global diversified manufacturer that's been around 140 plus years. And in terms of our products and services, you probably have heard of them, Club Car being one of the products that is probably the most known, as well as our HVAC systems, our Thermo King products, which keep products cool in terms of transportation to grocery stores and to other vendor locations like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, grocery store items, things like that, as well as our Trane air conditioning systems, which you probably have seen the ads on. So we are certainly very much in need of a workforce that is going to be capable and able to provide engineering services, technology services, able to help us take our organization into the next century of products in order to continue to grow and have an economic impact around the globe. So one of the things that if we can go maybe to the next slide, in terms of careers, we've been working really closely with the Manufacturing Association, because we saw that there was a huge need in manufacturing in terms of job growth opportunities, but not enough people to fill the jobs that we're going to have available. So we partnered with the National Manufacturing Association, in particular to start focusing on women in science and technology and production. However, as we worked with the Manufacturing Institute, they had partnered with Deloitte to do a study of the manufacturing space and the needs of STEM workers in manufacturing. And based on that study, it was determined that over the course of the next few years, we'll have over 3.4 million jobs that will need to be filled in manufacturing. However, there are not going to be enough people to fill those roles. And so we made a personal commitment as an organization to start to craft messaging around the STEM space for ourselves, but also to look at how we can partner with other manufacturing organizations to try and take on a triangulated approach to this work. Our own journey in the STEM space is still early, but what we have done, similar to what Vern shared, was identify who are the key stakeholders in our organization that could potentially help to make a difference in raising awareness and education about the need for talent in the organization, but also help to identify what are the skill sets that we are really going to need to grow. Not only looking at potential senior level attraction of talent, but also looking at those service technicians, those workers in the front lines in our operations, those workers that are going to be out servicing equipment, because we have to really be able to grow the whole pipeline, not just a portion of it. So over the course of this year, we pulled together representatives from our foundation, from our Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability, and then, of course, myself from the diversity function to start to do some brainstorming and lay out a strategy for STEM initiatives. Similar to the work that Vern is doing, which is then beginning to delve into who are the other stakeholders, who are the leaders and champions in the organization that we need to enroll. We've gone ahead and started to work with the engineering organization, which has the greatest need to develop engineering diversity strategy, and then within that, identify those areas in the STEM space that we're going to have to really focus on to attract and also to retain talent. The other thing that we've done is over the course of the last 4 years, this one has been in place a little bit longer, has been to develop and implement a leadership program designed to grow female pipeline in the diversity space. And so for the course of the last 4 years, we have graduated more than 102 potential leaders of the company that are female, that we're trying to move away from some of the traditional roles, but get them to really focus on operations leadership, management opportunities in the organization, to give them P&L experience in STEM-related fields, whether it be in our supply chain, whether it be our sales engineering, our operations, or service space. And we can go to the next slide if you'd like. So overall, our diversity journey has been in place for about 5 years. Our STEM journey started about 4 years ago. But with that said, we're just now getting to the point of really delving into a full-blown strategy and the creation and implementation of a full-blown strategy, rather than taking on areas of focus in the STEM space, one section at a time, such as just focusing on women. We're now looking at how do we affect change in the organization throughout the U.S., but also from a global perspective. We've got operations in a lot of different centers around the world, and we want to make sure that we're taking a comprehensive look at our strategy by not only focusing on the U.S., but other parts of the world that we operate, and then also by looking at not only senior leadership opportunities or middle management opportunities, but also service tech spaces where we need quite a few workers in the front lines. Other than that, some of the things that we've looked at are talent acquisition, branding, sustainability. We've got quite a bit of work that we've done, like Lockheed, in the sustainability space, and we know that we need environmental engineers, we need individuals that are committed to preserving our communities around the globe. And we've also started to leverage our diversity efforts through the inclusion of our employee resource groups, looking at the kinds of conferences and events that we sponsor from a talent perspective, and then also beginning to highlight and profile those senior leaders that do exist in our organization already that are champions for diversity and for the STEM space. And then we've built some unique partnerships externally through our employee resource groups and also through our diversity efforts and our work through the Ingersoll Rand Foundation with organizations like the Urban League, where we provided a grant to the Charlotte Urban League to help grow the service tech pipeline. So we not only donated equipment, but we also donated dollars, and we also donated instructors' time from Ingersoll Rand to be able to go and teach classes to help certify individuals in our servicing our types of equipment. And then we've partnered with the National Association of Manufacturers to help have an impact in the number of women that are being recognized and the pipeline that's being grown of females in the manufacturing space across the United States by providing a grant to the Manufacturing Institute to build out a leadership development academy for women in manufacturing. Last year, we graduated 130 women from various corporations across the United States. This year, we will also have 130 women go through the program, as well as be recognized for their services and contributions in the manufacturing space in the last few years. And currently, we're engaged in working with colleges and universities across the U.S. to identify which ones are the ones that we really want to partner with. Much like our competitors, we've oftentimes focused our energies around first-tier leverage schools. However, we found that we really needed to go in deeper and maybe look at second-tier schools, which are more closely located to areas where we do hiring in locations that some of the first-tier college students may not want to go to, places like Augusta, Georgia, or places like Tyler, Texas, where we have a large footprint. However, it's really hard to get those students that are graduating from universities from first-tier schools to want to go work in those locations that are a bit more remote. And then the other piece is really beginning a partnership with junior colleges and apprenticeship programs to grow our service tech footprint. We have been doing work in this space for about 2.5 years. We've now put together a committee to look at funding from our Ingersoll Rand Foundation. How do we leverage our retirees that have retired from Ingersoll Rand and have been service techs themselves to go and teach at some of these colleges, but also what else can we do in terms of leveraging existing employees, or also potentially attracting military personnel who are used to being in field-type opportunities or service to join some of these apprenticeship programs. And then, of course, we were one of the premier founders of STEMconnector.org, which is a global organization focusing on STEM, and have continued our partnership with them. And I'll stop there for any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Neddy. I really appreciate your comments. Vernon and Lindsey, yours as well. It's a fascinating dynamic and a lot of moving pieces. So we've had a lot of questions come in. Let me just go ahead and throw this one out there. Neddy, you kind of teed it up just a minute ago, but how are your, as you think about how you're retaining some of these millennials, and Vernon, I think you hit the nail on the head too with some of those who are a little bit more progressed in their career. What about retention, and how are you using these STEM-based opportunities? Are there mentorship or coaching opportunities that are helping not just to engage and retain the millennials, but also some of those who maybe been in their careers a little bit longer?
So, you know, one of the things that I think is really important, and that I saw in Vern's model, which we also are working on, is you've got to take on a very holistic approach. And so you can't just say, hey, we're going to do X, Y, Z for millennials, and then forget about the rest of the population, because it's really critical that you take a holistic view of the population in the programs that you're looking to launch. So the needs of those individuals that may be boomers, the needs of those individuals that are Xers and millennials may vary, but there are going to be common threads. So one of the things you really got to do is dig into some of the policies and some of the processes that you've got in terms of HR policies around flexibility, HR policies around sabbaticals and or policies around paternal leave as opposed to just maternity leave, because the generational differences have different needs, and you've got to be able to make sure that you're addressing them. But you've got to also find some common threads that people are going to say, hey, I may not be part of that generation, but I find enough value in what's happening in the organization around what the company's committed to doing that it's going to make me want to stay. The other thing is you've got to really take a closer look at your employee engagement surveys. What is it, what's the feedback from employees in terms of what their needs are, and then make sure that your managers and leaders are creating work environments that are speaking to having an open environment or having an environment where the employee feels valued and recognized the way that they want to be recognized, not the way that the company wants to recognize. So it's really more about creating customized approaches that allow individuals to really feel engaged and that they have a career path that they can pursue. So you've got to make sure you're taking a look at your systems on with a holistic lens.
No, I think that sounds great. Vernon, do you have a perspective on that as well?
Sure. I totally agree with, I think that was Neddy who was speaking, Neddy, Dr. Neddy Perez. Yeah. I agree with her comments, and just one thing I would add is one of the primary reasons that we are developing a repository of STEM resources is because we have now gotten the request about employees that they want to go into the classrooms of their own children and volunteer to help build this STEM pipeline, and they're asking us for the resources. And what we have found in one business area where we have developed resources that employees can leverage that's very consistent and can be used in the classrooms, the employees are so delighted that they are actually going into the classroom where their own children are students. The retention is extremely high in that organization. And we have attributed that to these employees being able to not only work, but leverage Lockheed Martin resources to help their own children become more STEM aware and to consider STEM careers and to help other students do the same. And so I think if we did more of that, it would certainly enhance or increase retention. And so that would be the other thing I would add.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. That builds into another question that I received of, and Vernon, I think this would be great for you. Do you target specific education levels? And as you look at that, as you're building out your repository, are you looking at those specific, grade appropriate, I guess, kind of tactics, but also at the same time, are you doing more one-on-one engagement, or is it a lot more of to the masses? And have you used technology for any of that?
So we haven't really done any one-on-one. All of our STEM efforts, both elementary, middle school, and high school, one, they are targeted. We try to target areas where there is a fair number of females and persons of color, and the activities are maybe 2 or 3, 4 Lockheed Martin employees engage in an entire classroom. And so that's been our model up to this point. The goal is to leverage technology going forward, and for schools, high schools now, there are high schools that are considered STEM-based high schools. And one recommendation I have, since those schools have been designed to be STEM-based high schools, they should have the technology. We certainly have the technology. So how do we link Lockheed Martin top scientists and researchers to those high schools using technology so that the students can stay in their classrooms and the Lockheed Martin scientists and technologists can stay at Lockheed Martin, but they can see our scientists as the presenter, and our presenter can see that entire classroom. That is what I am strongly recommending going forward, and I would recommend that for any organization so that we are bridging the gap, again, between industry and academia, but also leveraging technology.
No, I definitely see that in my children's classroom. That is definitely coming, where it's more and more that public partner kind of private partnerships and a lot of that that's going on.
Yes.
This is probably a slightly loaded question, but I'll throw it out there and see if you can weigh in on it. What are some of the, besides competitive wages, what are other benefits that are going to help retain some of this top STEM talent? And I heard, I think it was Neddy, maybe you mentioned sabbaticals earlier. You know, what are there other types of things that maybe differentiate a little bit but really help retain that talent 5–10 years from now?
I think, this is Lindsey, I think one thing I'd like to jump in on that point, I think is related to the prior question about retention, and actually ties back to a point you made, Ann, to help kick us off, which is, you know, what do people value, what are they looking for in their organizations? And one of the top responses that you saw come up is, you know, ethics and integrity. And I think that is something that is key and critical to retention and to retaining top talent in an organization. People want to work somewhere where they feel like the organization is walking the talk or practicing what they preach, so to speak. And so having a set of values that people buy into, but feeling that those are truly lived and that also people are held accountable when they're not, from leadership on down, is a true, I think, differentiator and something that people are really desperately looking for in the organizations that they're working for, that kind of gives that higher sense of meaning and purpose and makes them feel good about the place that they work. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact that has on the employees in an organization.
Yeah, and I would agree with Lindsey that ethics and integrity is certainly at the top of the list. And the one thing that I would add, which is something that I was working in a prior role, I used to be responsible for cybersecurity talent management and development at Lockheed Martin. And we were losing some very highly skilled cybersecurity talent. And after researching and surveying many highly skilled cyber professionals, we learned that those individuals felt that we were not fully leveraging their talent and expertise. And so one of the things that we presented to our senior vice president or executive vice president was that we need to leverage the talents of these individuals and give them a sense of value by inviting them to become instructors, to become speakers, and to represent Lockheed Martin external to the organization so that they felt that they were really and truly valued by the organization. So I think when we, in terms of STEM professionals, given the need for STEM professionals, when we know that we have individuals who are highly skilled in a STEM area, we need to somehow come up with a way that we demonstrate that we value them. Because as many of you probably have learned, that compensation money is good and everyone, you know, loves to have or make as much money as they can, but ethics and integrity and feeling valued is most important. And so we really need to begin to show our STEM workforce, and we need to ensure that it's really part of our culture, that we demonstrate that we value.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Yep.
No, I absolutely could not agree more, Vernon. I think you're right on. Neddy, do you have any perspective you want to bring to this? Oh, sorry, we may have. Oh, there she is.
No, actually, I'm sorry. I was trying to log into the other phone, but I did want to say, I thought that the things that Vern said are really important. But one thing from just having spoken at so many different groups, purely of the next generation of STEM leaders, that keeps coming up is the kinds of projects and opportunities for them to create and contribute to the design of products and services that are meaningful and valuable in the work that they do. And so the other thing that I think is really critical for that transcends some of the generations right now is having flexibility in the work environment so that it doesn't really matter where you live and work, but rather it's about contributing to the products and services. I just had an opportunity to meet with the folks at E&Y, and they employ on average about 5,000 to 3,000 new hires a year in the finance space for auditing and all of that. And one of the things that they were talking about, and they've actually published a study of their early generation workers, one of the things that they continue to talk about is, and hear, is that it's about the work. What am I contributing to? How am I building my skills? And I think if you can show someone who is coming into the space that their work is going to make a difference, whether it's to the environment, whether it's to the community, whether it is to society in some way or aspect, then it gives them more meaning. So that is really critical. And then along the lines of that, it's how challenging is the work, and how am I enabled to build the skills that I need to continue to grow and develop as a person, whether it's by giving back to society or to the organization in some way or aspect. And then it's the flexibility. Can I live and work where I want to? Do I have time to go and play? But when I'm working hard and I'm making a difference in delivering change that's sustainable in the organization.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've hit on a lot of different things today and different opportunities that hopefully we can all take back to our own cultures and consider and think about, especially as we look at 2016 right here on the horizon and how we might be able to strategically plan for some of these ideas and best case practices that we can weave those into our own workspaces. I want to thank again Lindsey, Vernon, and Neddy for just a fascinating dialogue. I think this is something that's going to continue over the next few years as we see more and more of these challenges of educating and recruiting and retaining employees in this really critical space for these high-value jobs and what that's going to mean for our future. So I just want to thank everybody for participating today and for joining us in the webinar. We really appreciate that. And if you've got more questions, you can reach me on Twitter at Ann Camden, or I'm also on LinkedIn. And of course, Mary has sent out a lot of our background information to generate for this webinar today. So if you need to reach out to us, please feel free. Thanks so much for your time, and we greatly appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.